Imagine sitting across a table from someone who has, hurt you a dozen times before.
Right. It is a tough situation.
It really is. They look you dead in the eye and their voice is shaking with what sounds like genuine emotion.
Mhm.
And they say, I promise you, I have
And
changed.
you just desperately want to believe them.
Yes, exactly. Every single part of you wants to trust that this time is actually different. But there is this quiet voice in the back of your head.
The voice built by years of hard experience, right?
Yeah, that voice. And it asks a very simple but really terrifying question. Is that even biologically possible?
It is, honestly, the ultimate human dilemma. I mean, we face this in our romantic relationships, in our families, at work, and, well, even when we look in the mirror.
Definitely.
We all want to believe in the capacity for transformation, but our history often tells us a completely different story.
And usually, when we try to understand a really complex problem in life, we can rely on precise tools. Like if you fall down and your arm hurts, you go to the hospital.
Right, you get some medical evidence.
Exactly. A doctor takes an x ray, points to a jagged white line on a screen, and says, well, there's the fracture. It is a clean, visible, objective fact.
But when we step into the world of human nature and psychology, uh, that X-ray machine just disappears.
It totally vanishes. You cannot take a picture of someone's character. You can't scan a brain to see if, their moral compass has shifted.
No, you really can't. You are looking at a landscape that is entirely invisible to the naked eye. I mean, you cannot measure human intent with a ruler.
And that leads to an incredible amount of confusion and pain. We try to use the logic of the physical world to understand the psychological world, and it just completely fails us.
It fails us every single time.
And that brings us directly to the core mission of our deep dive today. So I want to warmly welcome you, our listener, to this exploration.
We are so glad you're here with us.
We really are. Our goal today is to answer the question that has, ruined marriages, frustrated managers, and kept psychologists awake at night. Do you believe people can really change?
It is such a massive question. Are human beings truly capable of fundamentally altering who they are? Or is real change simply an illusion we create just to make ourselves feel a little better?
Before we jump in, I want to make a quick note about our pacing today.
Mhm.
We are going to take our time with this deep dive.
Yes, we're not going to rush through these concepts.
Exactly. We are going to speak clearly and break down these big psychological ideas so that you can easily follow along. If you are an English learner or just someone looking to absorb these ideas without feeling rushed, this conversation is perfectly tailored for you.
It is so important to take it slow. Because to answer this big question, we really need to build a strong foundation first.
So where do we start?
Well, the sources we've gathered for this discussion are very clear that the absolute biggest mistake we make in this debate is not defining our terms.
Right. We have to know what we are talking about.
Exactly. People argue endlessly about whether change is possible, but they're often arguing about two completely different definitions of the word itself.
Okay, let's break that down carefully then. If I say, I am going to change, what exactly does that mean?
That is the perfect starting point.
Because our sources separate human change into two distinct categories. There is the surface level, and then there is the deep level.
Yes, let's start with the surface level. This is basically the realm of doing.
Doing. Okay, so action-based.
Exactly. It is entirely about altering your daily habits or your physical routines. Surface level change is highly visible.
Give me some examples of that.
Sure. It is deciding to wake up at 6 in the morning instead of 8. Or, choosing to drink water instead of soda.
Or making a strict schedule for your workday and actually following it.
Right. These are behavioral modifications. You are changing what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Now, let's be totally fair here. Changing a routine is not easy. Going to the gym every day when you would much rather stay in bed and sleep, that is a really difficult physical accomplishment.
Oh, absolutely. It takes a lot of willpower.
But it is still considered surface level, right? Because it doesn't require a fundamental shift in your core identity. You are managing your behavior, but you aren't questioning your very soul.
That is a great way to put it.
Yeah.
You are changing the outputs of the machine, but you aren't changing the machine itself.
Right.
Now contrast that with the second category, which is the deep level. This is not about doing. This is about being.
The level of being. Wow. That implies a completely different kind of work.
It really does. Deep change means altering how you react emotionally to sudden stress. It means fundamentally changing how you treat other people when you are, say, exhausted or angry.
So it is much more internal.
Yes, it involves rewriting your core values, your deepest beliefs about trust, or your capacity for empathy. It is the invisible architecture of your personality.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to use a simple analogy here because grasping the difference between these two levels is crucial for everything else we are going to discuss today.
Analogies are perfect for this. Let's hear it.
Think about a computer. Making a surface level change is like changing the background wallpaper on your desktop. Or maybe, downloading a new app.
Okay, I follow that. It takes just a few clicks.
Exactly. The computer looks different. It might even perform a new function like a new game or a calendar app.
Yeah.
But the underlying system is exactly the same.
That is a great starting point.
Yeah.
So what is the deep change in that computer scenario?
Well, deep change is like trying to rewrite the computer's core operating system. And here's the catch. You have to rewrite the operating system while the computer is still turned on and running.
Oh, wow. That sounds risky.
It is incredibly risky. If you type one wrong line of code, the entire system crashes. It is delicate, highly complex, and inherently dangerous.
I like that analogy much better than the old cliches we usually hear, because rewriting an operating system requires an entirely different skill set than just downloading a simple app.
It really does.
When someone tries to change their deep emotional reactions, they aren't just trying to learn a new trick. They are actively fighting against years, and sometimes decades, of biological and psychological wiring.
So how does that wiring actually work? I mean, why is the operating system so stubborn and hard to rewrite?
It all comes down to how the brain processes survival. Your brain is perfectly designed to recognize patterns and create automatic responses to keep you safe.
Safe from what, exactly?
Well, emotional pain, physical threats, social rejection. For example, if you grew up in an environment where raising your voice was the absolute only way to be heard, your brain wired a specific connection.
Okay, so it learns a rule.
Exactly. The rule is, when I feel ignored, I must shout to survive. And over 20 years, that connection becomes a thick, insulated neurological highway. It is incredibly fast.
So when an adult partner ignores them in the living room, they don't consciously decide to yell. The signal travels down that thick highway before they even realize what is happening.
Precisely. Trying to stop that reaction isn't just about making a polite, conscious choice in the moment.
It's way deeper than that.
Yes. It requires building an entirely new neurological pathway from scratch while actively letting the old highway crumble from disuse. You have to intercept a biological reflex.
And that is why changing who you are is infinitely more complex than changing what time you wake up.
Exactly.
This perfectly explains why we experience so much confusion in our relationships. We see someone make a surface-level change, maybe they get a great new job, they start dressing beautifully, and they stop eating junk food.
Right, they look like a whole new person.
Yeah, we see the new background wallpaper on their computer, and we just assume their core operating system has been upgraded too. We trust them with our emotions, only to be totally shocked when, under pressure, they act the exact same way they did 5 years ago.
We confuse the app with the operating system. And when the old operating system inevitably crashes, we feel betrayed.
We really do. But wait, I have to ask. If rewriting the operating system is so difficult, and it requires fighting our own biology, we have to ask the next logical question.
Which is?
Is it actually possible? We have defined the deep level of change, but does the evidence support that people can successfully accomplish it?
The short answer is yes. It is possible.
Okay, that is a relief.
We know deep change is possible because we can observe it happening naturally over the course of a human lifetime. The key concept here is adult neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity. Let's make sure we explain that clearly for everyone listening.
Absolutely. For a long time, scientists believed that human brains basically stopped developing in our mid-20s. The idea was that by age 25, your concrete was poured, it was dry, and you were stuck with that shape forever.
But the sources indicate that theory has been completely overturned.
Completely overturned.
Yep.
We now know that the brain remains plastic, meaning it can physically change its structure and rewire its connections until the day we die.
That is amazing. So it stays flexible.
Yes. Life experiences continuously apply pressure to our neurological pathways. Growing up, learning, and adapting actually force us to change.
So nature actually forces us to evolve. You literally cannot remain the exact same person at age 50 that you were at age 20. The environment simply won't allow it.
Let's look at a classic specific example from the research to make this clear. Take an incredibly irresponsible 20-year-old.
Okay, I think we've all known someone like this.
Right. Someone who constantly forgets their obligations, spends all their money recklessly, and reacts to any kind of criticism with extreme defensiveness. If you look at them then, you might say, they will never be a functional adult.
Because they just seem so stuck in their ways.
Exactly. But fast forward 15 years. That exact same individual might now be a highly disciplined parent, managing a mortgage, raising a child, and handling workplace conflict with total calm and maturity.
I want to stop you right there, though. I have some pushback on this. Because yes, I see that happen. We all see people mature. But is that actually a fundamental change in their operating system? Or did society just place such heavy consequences on them that they learned to act disciplined just to avoid punishment?
That is a very valid question.
Like, if you took away the mortgage, the job, and the child, would they instantly revert to being a reckless 20-year-old? Did they really change, or are they just performing for society?
That is a phenomenal pushback. Are we genuinely changing, or are we just adapting to survive the social pressures around us?
Right. What do the sources say?
Well, the evidence suggests that consistent performance eventually becomes reality.
Really? How does that work?
If you are forced by society to act responsibly every single day for 10 years, your brain is actively building that new neurological highway we discussed earlier.
Oh, I see. Because you are repeating the action over and over.
Exactly. Eventually, the performance of responsibility becomes the brain's default automatic setting. The operating system actually does get rewritten through sheer repetition.
Okay, so the biological mechanism works. But this leads me to a massive contradiction.
What is that?
If change is neurologically possible, and we naturally adapt over time through repetition, why does true, deliberate change feel like the exception rather than the rule?
It does feel very rare.
Right. If everyone has a plastic, flexible brain, why are so many people permanently stuck in toxic patterns?
Because having the capacity for change and successfully executing the process of change are two vastly different things.
Just because you have a car doesn't mean you know how to drive it.
Exactly. The reality is the process of deliberately rewriting your own code is agonizingly uncomfortable. And human biology is designed to avoid discomfort at absolutely all costs.
Let's dive deep into that discomfort then. Let's trace the actual step-by-step journey of someone trying to change a deep character flaw. What is the very first barrier they hit?
The first barrier is simple awareness. And frankly, this is where 90% of people fail right away.
Wow, 90%. Why?
So before you can change a toxic behavior, you must clearly see it and admit that it is wrong.
Which means confronting your own ego.
And the ego is the single most powerful defense mechanism in the human mind. The ego's entire job is to protect your self-image. It wants you to feel safe, capable, and good.
So it hates admitting fault.
Exactly. When you do something terrible, like screaming at a friend or sabotaging a work project, the ego immediately kicks in to protect you from the pain of guilt. It generates rationalizations.
It's that little voice inside that says, well, I didn't yell because I have an anger problem. I yelled because they were being completely unreasonable and they just pushed my buttons.
Exactly. The ego shifts the blame entirely to the external world. To achieve true awareness, you have to bypass that defense mechanism.
Which is not easy to do.
It is incredibly difficult. You have to look in the mirror and experience the profound, often crushing psychological pain of saying, I am the problem, the way I process the world is flawed, and I am hurting people.
That level of absolute vulnerability feels like a literal physical threat to the brain.
It does. It triggers alarms. So people will construct elaborate, alternate realities just to avoid that moment of self-blame.
They will literally lose their jobs, their marriages, and their best friends, and somehow still convince themselves that the entire world is just crazy rather than admit they need to change.
It is the tragedy of the human condition.
Yeah.
But let's assume someone actually survives step
Well,
one.
let's say they do.
They have their moment of clarity, they bypass the ego, and they admit, I have a profound issue with anger, and I need to change. They have crossed the first hurdle. What happens next?
Well, knowing you have a problem does not magically fix the problem. Step 2 is where the actual battle begins. And this brings us to the science of habits and energy conservation.
Yes, this is where we talk about the powerful pull of the familiar.
Exactly. To understand this, we have to look at the brain's energy budget. Because the human brain is a very energy-hungry organ, it takes up a huge percentage of our daily calories.
And because our ancient ancestors lived in environments where food was very scarce, our brains evolved to be incredibly stingy with energy.
It wants to run on battery saver mode as much as possible.
Exactly. And how does the brain save energy? By turning repeated behaviors into automatic habits. When you do something automatically, your brain barely uses any energy at all.
But when you try to learn something new or force a new behavior, what happens?
You have to engage the prefrontal cortex, that is the logical, thinking, conscious part of the brain. and the prefrontal cortex burns a massive amount of energy.
Okay, so let's use an example. Let's say our person with the anger problem gets into a really stressful argument. They want to react differently this time. They want to stay calm.
A great goal.
To do that, they have to power up the prefrontal cortex, analyze the situation, physically stop the automatic reflex, and choose a polite response. That takes huge effort.
But there is a massive biological problem in that exact moment. When you are in an argument, you are under stress. Your heart rate is up. And what does the brain do under stress?
It panics, right?
Yes, it panics about survival. It decides, we do not have the luxury of burning extra energy right now. Shut down the prefrontal cortex and switch over to the automatic zero-energy response immediately.
Which means they default to screaming. Not because they want to, but because screaming is the familiar, energy-efficient pathway their brain already knows best.
The familiar is a gravitational pull. The brain associates the familiar with safety, even if the familiar behavior is actively destroying your life.
That is so wild to think about.
A toxic, destructive habit feels safer to your nervous system than a healthy, unknown, new behavior.
So we need an analogy here. I like to think about walking through a forest.
Oh, I like this one.
Breaking a habit is like taking a heavy machete and trying to cut a brand new, painful path through thick bushes and thorns. Your hands get blistered, it is slow, and it hurts.
While the familiar habit is.
The familiar habit is a smooth, perfectly paved road right next to you. Of course you want to take the easy paved road, even if you know that paved road leads straight off a cliff.
That is the perfect way to phrase it. You will actively run toward a known poison, rather than taste an unknown cure, simply because your brain recognizes the poison.
And this perfectly explains why change fails so often. I mean, think about a Sunday morning.
What happens on a Sunday morning?
When someone is calm, rested, sitting with a cup of coffee, and not under stress, their prefrontal cortex has plenty of energy. They can say, I will never be angry again.
Because it is easy to say when you feel safe.
Exactly. But then Tuesday evening rolls around. They are exhausted from work, they are hungry, the traffic was terrible, and they face a conflict at home.
And in that moment, the prefrontal cortex goes completely offline. The brain switches to battery saver mode, and the old operating system takes over.
And this brings us to the really sad collateral damage of this whole process. Because while someone is struggling in this cycle, having moments of clarity, promising to change, and then failing because their biology pulls them back, there are usually other people watching.
Yes, friends, romantic partners, children.
And those observers are getting hurt over and over again. Which naturally leads us to the societal cynicism surrounding our core question today.
That is so true. The phrase "people don't change" isn't actually a scientific statement. It is an emotional scar.
Let's dissect the root of that disbelief. Where does that deep cynicism actually come from?
It comes from the cycle of disappointment.
I want to look closely at the psychology of the promise itself, because this is fascinating. When someone hurts you and they realize they are about to lose you, they often panic. They look at you and they promise, they swear to change.
But what is actually happening in their brain in that exact moment?
Right. What is the science there?
Well, when someone makes a grand declaration like, I will be a better person, I will stop drinking, I will be patient, their brain actually releases a massive rush of dopamine.
And dopamine is the chemical associated with reward and accomplishment, right?
Yes.
Wait, let me stop you. Are you saying they get the chemical reward of changing their life just by talking about changing their life?
Yes, exactly. The brain often struggles to distinguish between visualizing an accomplishment and actually achieving it in the physical world.
That is mind-blowing.
By making a dramatic emotional promise, they feel a sense of relief and triumph. They literally feel like a new person in that moment. And because they feel so authentic, you, as the listener, believe them.
Because you can see the emotion on their face. It looks real.
It is real to them in that second. So you extend your trust again, which is a deeply vulnerable act.
But the dopamine fades. A week later, the biological reality of the battery saver mode kicks back in. They revert to the old operating system, and the person who trusted them is left completely devastated.
And when you go through that cycle enough times, the hope, the trust, the inevitable failure, the devastation, the mind just cannot handle the repeated trauma.
So what does mind do?
It builds a protective shield.
The shield is the belief that humanity is fixed. We say, this is just who they are, they will never be different.
It's an incredibly effective defense mechanism if you think about it. If you genuinely convince yourself that human beings are incapable of change, then you never have to hope.
And if you never hope, you never extend your trust.
Exactly. And if you never trust, your heart can never be broken again. You neutralize the threat entirely.
I see how that works, but I have to challenge this mindset. While I completely understand the self-protection aspect, isn't that belief just a convenient excuse to avoid dealing with people?
How do you mean?
Well, if we say people don't change, we don't just protect ourselves, we also give ourselves permission to abandon them. We don't have to do the hard, messy work of supporting someone through the nonlinear process of growth. We just write them off.
That is the dark side of the shield. It protects you, yes, but it also completely isolates you. And worse, if you project that belief onto everyone else, you inevitably apply it to yourself.
Oh, wow, I didn't think about that.
If you believe your partner can't change, you must also fundamentally believe your own flaws are permanent. It becomes a philosophy of total stagnation.
This raises an important question then. Are our beliefs about change based on actual facts, or just based on our own unhealed disappointments?
That is a brilliant question for the listener to think about.
So how do we escape this trap? We want to believe in growth, right? But we don't want to be fools who get hurt repeatedly by empty promises. How do we measure change in a healthy, realistic way?
Our sources point to a very specific practical framework for this. It is what we might call the show me principle.
The show me principle. I like the sound of that.
To navigate this safely without becoming totally cynical, we have to completely overhaul our metric for evaluating human behavior. And the very first rule of this principle,
What is it?
you must aggressively ignore words.
Words are cheap. This is a brutal truth we all have to accept. As we just discussed with the dopamine effect, words require absolutely 0 calories to produce.
Anyone can say the right things when they are backed into a corner or afraid of facing a consequence.
In fact, here's where it gets really interesting. The sources say that the more articulate and emotional the apology, the more skeptical you should sometimes be.
That is a hard pill to swallow, but it is true. Language is just an evolutionary tool designed to manage social situations and soothe conflicts. It is not an accurate reflection of the deep operating system.
So if we ignore the words, what are we looking for? What is the proof?
Patterns. Consistent, unglamorous, quiet patterns over an extended timeline.
But what does a real pattern look like? Because, if someone is kind to me for a week, that feels like a pattern to me.
A week is not a pattern. A week is just good behavior.
Okay, fair enough.
Think about it this way. Anyone can hold their breath underwater for 60 seconds, but eventually they had to come up for air. True change can only be verified when the person is placed under extreme stress.
Give me a specific example of how that looks in real life.
Sure. Imagine someone who is historically very defensive and critical whenever they are stressed about money. They promise they have changed. And for 3 whole months, they are wonderful, calm, and supportive.
That sounds great. So they changed, right?
Not necessarily, because during those 3 months, their bank account is full and work is going great. They haven't proven any change at all. They have just proven they are pleasant when life is easy.
Oh, I see. The real test happens when the car breaks down and costs $2,000 to fix, and on the exact same day, they lose a major client at work.
Exactly. When the stress hits, the prefrontal cortex begs to shut down. The brain screams to go back to the old, familiar pathway of lashing out and being critical.
And if in that specific moment of immense pressure, they take a deep breath, manage their fear, and speak to you with respect.
That is a data point.
Yeah.
That is real evidence. If they do that consistently over several different crises spanning a year or more, now you are looking at a real pattern. Now you can believe the operating system has actually been updated.
And this highlights the grand illusion of modern culture. We are utterly obsessed with the quick fix.
We really are.
We want the 30-day diet to transform our bodies, and we want the weekend retreat to transform our souls. But human nature does not run on a monthly subscription model.
It definitely doesn't. True transformation is compounding interest. It is a slow, tedious, unsexy grind. It is making the right choice, slightly more often than the wrong choice, for years.
Which brings up a fascinating irony. Think about the people in your life or, people you see online. Isn't it true that the people who boast the loudest about how much they have changed are usually the ones who have changed the least?
It is a remarkably consistent phenomenon.
You see someone post a long, emotional essay on social media about their new mindset or how they have eliminated toxic energy from their life and how evolved they are. Why are they broadcasting it so loudly?
Because they are seeking external validation to substitute for internal reality.
Exactly. They haven't actually done the grueling work of changing their core code. They just bought a new t-shirt that says, "I am enlightened," and they want everyone to applaud the shirt.
The people who are actively engaged in deep structural change are usually incredibly quiet about it. They don't have the energy to brag because all of their mental energy is being consumed by the internal battle of holding off their old habits.
That makes total sense. Now, we have spent this entire time talking about the mechanics of replacing an old trait with a new one, but our sources introduce a totally different, honestly quite radical perspective that flips this entire conversation upside down.
Yes, the reveal theory. And it challenges absolutely everything we have discussed so far.
What if the illusion of change is just that, an illusion? What if we don't actually rewrite the operating system at all?
The theory posits that human beings don't actually change their core nature. Instead, as we move through life, we simply become more of who we always were.
It is not about changing, it is about revealing. Walk me through how that works, because it sounds a little bit like you were saying we have no free will and our destiny is just locked at birth.
It's not quite that fatalistic. Think of it this way. Every human being has a vast, complex spectrum of traits, values, and tendencies inside them. When we are young, society demands that we wear certain masks.
Right. We hide parts of ourselves to fit in at high school, to secure our first job, to attract a romantic partner.
We spend an enormous amount of energy suppressing our true nature just to survive in the social hierarchy.
So we are constantly acting.
Yes. But as you age, as you hit your 40s, 50s, and beyond, several things happen. You gain security, or perhaps you just become exhausted. The energy required to maintain the mask runs out.
And slowly, the buried traits push their way to the surface.
Yes. When you look at someone and think, wow, they have changed into a totally different person, you are actually just seeing them drop the mask. You are finally meeting the person they always were.
The sources use a beautiful analogy for this, and I want to explore it. It's like old school film photography.
Oh, the darkroom analogy. It is brilliant.
Imagine a piece of photographic paper sitting in a dark room. When you first look at it, it appears entirely blank. But then you slide the paper into a chemical bath, the liquid washes over it, and slowly a picture begins to emerge.
First, the shadows appear, then the details, then the sharp lines.
Exactly. And the key to that analogy is understanding the role of the chemicals. The chemical bath did not draw the picture. It didn't add anything new to the paper.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the image was already burned into the film the very moment the camera clicked. The chemical bath simply provided the necessary environment to reveal what was hidden, making it visible to the naked eye.
So in this framework, life experiences, the stress, the joy, the heartbreak, the aging process, those are the chemical baths. They don't rewrite our core code. They just wash away the blank surface and reveal the image underneath.
It is a profound way to look at human development. If someone seems to become deeply bitter and cruel in their late 40s, the reveal theory suggests they didn't suddenly catch a disease of bitterness.
That anger was always their core image. They just stopped having the energy to pretend they were happy.
Exactly.
But hold on, doesn't that totally invalidate personal responsibility? If someone acts like a jerk and the reveal theory says, well, they were always a jerk, it is just their true picture developing, isn't that just a sophisticated excuse?
It certainly sounds like one.
Why should anyone ever try to be better if their picture's already printed?
That is the exact tension psychologists wrestle with. But the resolution is that the photograph of your true self isn't just one static image. It is a complex collage of multiple potentials.
Oh, potentials. Tell me more.
You have the potential for deep cruelty and the potential for immense grace, both burned onto the exact same film.
So the choices we make and the work we do determines which parts of the image get developed and which parts stay in the shadows.
Exactly. You are revealing your true self, but you still have a hand in deciding which version of your true self takes center stage.
That is beautiful.
If someone becomes incredibly generous and kind later in life, it is because that deep capacity for love was always within them, previously blocked by youthful insecurity or fear. Once the fear faded, the generosity finally emerged.
I love that. Changing versus revealing. But whether it is a fundamental rewiring of your brain's operating system or a deep revealing of your hidden photograph in the darkroom, neither of those processes happen by accident.
No, they certainly do not.
People do not just wake up on a random sunny Tuesday morning stretch and say, I think I will undergo agonizing psychological labor today.
No one does that willingly.
Something massive has to trigger the slow, difficult process. When does real change finally happen?
To initiate a process this painful, there must be an overwhelming catalyst. You need a highly compelling reason to abandon the familiar, easy path and step into the terrifying unknown.
And the data is very clear on what the most powerful external trigger is.
It is pain.
It is profound, undeniable pain. Humans are governed by a psychological principle called loss aversion.
Yes, loss aversion, meaning we are far more motivated by the fear of losing something than by the prospect of gaining something.
It is the breaking point. It is almost always tied to a major life earthquake. The sudden end of a 15-year marriage, a terrifying medical diagnosis that puts your mortality right in front of your face.
Or hitting absolute rock bottom with a devastating habit.
It is the moment when the suffering of staying exactly the same finally outweighs the suffering required to change.
It is a cold biological equation. As long as the familiar operating system is functioning, even if it is producing a mediocre or mildly unhappy life, the brain will resist changing it.
It just wants to conserve energy.
Exactly. It is only when the operating system completely crashes and your life is in absolute ruins that the brain finally concedes. It says, okay, our current strategy is threatening our survival. We have permission to rewrite the code.
It is a bit melancholic, isn't it? Is it just a sad truth about human nature that we usually wait until we are in immense pain before we are willing to change? Why can't we change out of pure joy?
It is a sad truth. Because joy does not signal a threat to survival. Contentment signals that whatever you are doing is working, so the brain locks it in.
That makes sense biologically.
However, the sources do offer a silver lining here. External devastation isn't the only trigger. Sometimes the catalyst is an internal shift.
Like a spontaneous crisis of conscience.
Yes, a moment of intense, blinding clarity. It happens when a person takes an honest look at their life, observes how their actions deeply affect the people around them, and feels a profound, sickening sense of misalignment.
They realize the person they are acting like is completely disconnected from the person they desperately want to be.
It is an internal breaking point rather than an external one, and whether the trigger is losing a marriage or having a sudden internal realization, both of these scenarios point to the single most critical requirement for real change.
This is the golden rule of our entire deep dive today.
And motivation must be entirely intrinsic. You have to genuinely, desperately want to change for yourself.
Intrinsic, meaning it comes from inside you. Not extrinsic, meaning it comes from the outside. You can't do it to please a partner. You can't do it to appease a boss or to get your parents off your back.
Extrinsic motivation, doing it for someone else, is incredibly weak. If you are only trying to fix your anger because your spouse is threatening to leave, you might be able to suppress your reactions for a few weeks.
You might power up that prefrontal cortex temporarily.
But because the core desire doesn't belong to you, your energy will eventually run out. The familiar low-energy habits will call your name, and you will slide right back into them.
You have to want the new reality for your own soul. You have to decide that the old version of you is dead, and you're willing to walk through the fire to build the new one, regardless of who is watching.
Ownership of the process is the only thing that sustains the process.
It is the ultimate test of human agency. We have covered so much ground today. We've navigated some incredibly deep waters.
We really have.
From the difference between downloading a surface-level app and rewriting your core operating system to the neuroscience of why our brains fight change to save energy.
We've looked at the dopamine trap of empty promises, the slow, quiet reality of looking for behavioral patterns over words, and the profound idea that we might just be developing our true photograph in the darkroom of life.
So, if we pull all of these threads together, what is the final verdict on our core mission today? Do we believe people can really change?
The answer is a heavily qualified yes. Yes, people can truly change. The capacity for profound transformation is woven into our biology. Our brains remain plastic. Our potentials remain varied. However, it is fundamentally almost unimaginably difficult. It does not happen often. It never happens overnight. And it absolutely never happens just because someone spoke the words, "I promise I will be better."
It takes immense time, grueling effort, consistency under stress, and a profound, genuine desire to be different.
It is arguably the hardest, most courageous work a human being can undertake in their lifetime.
And as we bring this unhurried, thoughtful exploration to a close, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final provocative thought to carry with you.
A mirror to hold up.
Exactly. Take a look at the landscape of your own life. Think about the people you interact with every single day.